Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. His new book is called Collusion, ripped from today's headlines. He tweeted out yesterday, Mueller tried today to have it both ways. If he thought the president was guilty of something, he should have said that he was guilty of something. Ken Starr used the word guilty 11 times on 11 different counts in his report on President Clinton. If not guilty, Trump is innocent. Well, that's the way it used to work in America, Mr. Speaker. Welcome back.
Well, I think it's the way it still works in America. I think that Mueller just made a huge mistake, and I think that it discredits deeply everything else he has said. It's particularly ironic, almost funny, that he in the same paragraph says, now, of course, the Russians are innocent until proven guilty, even though they've been indicted, and then turns around and says that he didn't have enough information to prove that Trump was innocent. Well, he just set the standard a second ago for Russians. If you are not guilty, you are by definition innocent. We don't need a prosecutor to declare you're innocent. You have an automatic presumption of innocence in America, and I think when he said it yesterday, I couldn't believe it. It was such a reversal of everything America stands for, and I did a Facebook Live last night. It spent about 25 minutes. I don't get quite your audience, but I just wanted to get it out of my system. And by the time I got around to doing it, there were several great op-eds already written, including one by Alan Dershowitz, that just took Mueller's position and shredded it. And I think people should relax and just say, there's not going to be any conviction in the U.S. Senate. I have a hunch there's not going to be any real move in the House. And Mueller now has position himself to look very foolish.
Well, I think the other thing is Robert Mueller is deathly afraid of going before Congress. I thought a big part of yesterday for him was to signal to Jerry Nadler, don't call me before Congress. I have nothing else to add, and was not articulate in what he said, which is why they had to put out a clarification of what he meant and the things that he had said before, which he contradicted yesterday. But I don't think he wants to have to answer, when did you know that no collusion nor conspiracy occurred? Why did you hire this abusively biased team, even Hillary Clinton's attorney? Why would you hire somebody to be your pit bull with the atrocious record of Andrew Weissman? And then the very important question, which is, well, if you had time to investigate taxi medallions, loan applications, taxes, and FARA violations, why did you give zero time, considering your mandate was broad enough to hit all those issues, into a dirty Russian dossier that was, in fact, bought and paid for and used to influence the 2016 election? How do you avoid, dealing with that elephant in the room?
Look, I think that Mueller found himself over his head. I think he did a very inadequate job. But my view is, let's focus people like Lindsey Graham on 2016, not on Mueller in 2019. I mean, what I want to know is, why did the National Security Advisor seek to unmask an unprecedented number of Americans? Why the whole story of the meeting in the airport in Phoenix? I mean, I think if you want to put somebody under oath, I'd like to see the former Attorney General put under oath and ask, what did she and Bill Clinton talk about for 30 minutes?
Mr. Speaker, I hate to correct you. We've been friends for, 30 years, but it was 45 minutes. That's a long time to talk about grandkids.
Listen, I always appreciate your passion for accuracy, and I'll be glad to return the favor one morning. But you're right. Well, it just makes the case bigger. I mean, to suggest to us that they happen to set up a meeting, that they happen to be social, I mean, this is beyond any plausible credibility. So I think what I'm really interested in is all the things that were done in 2016 that were, I think, inconceivable. How did they avoid going after the guy who took a hammer to destroying the smartphones? I mean, how can that not be obstruction of justice? There's just so many things that went wrong in 2016 that we have still not even scratched the surface of, and I'm hopeful that Attorney General Barr is going to dig into those and is going to release some documents to enable the American people to understand just how sick the system was and just how bad the decisions were.
Well, I mean, this is a problem that we have. I call it selective moral outrage. A few quick examples. One, well, Democrats claim that they care about collusion or outside interference in our electoral system. We currently have Ukraine willing to admit with evidence of the DNC conspiring with Ukraine and officials in a case where they were trying to influence the 2016 election in favor of Hillary. We know that Hillary paid for hiring a foreign agent with funneled money, a Russian dossier that was disseminated to the press, the Washington Post, David Korn, Michael Isikoff, for the means of impacting the 2016 election, but even more sinister and importantly, denying an American citizen, Carter Page, his constitutional rights, but it also gave them a backdoor into all things Trump campaign. Yes, real spying occurred. It was never verified. We now know there were multiple warnings going back to as early as August of 2016 that they knew Hillary paid for the dirty dossier. They knew it was unverified and uncorroborated. And they also knew Christopher Steele hated Donald Trump. Now, that to me would be far more important and far closer to Mueller's original mandate to investigate than a FARA violation or a loan application or a taxi medallion financial issue.
Well, that's right. And look, I think if you were to, there's a case to be made. I don't think this is as important in the short run, but there is a case to be made at some point for looking at the totality of the Mueller investigation. I mean, I still can't believe that he got away with putting Americans into solitary confinement for as long as he did. Which was clearly a mental health problem. I mean, the Russian woman he was trying to break actually served over half of her total prison time in solitary confinement. Now, I mean, I think in that sense, there's a whole question of the entire Mueller investigation, but I think it's currently so tainted by the fight over President Trump. I'd like to let it go for a little while and focus back on what I think was the real story in 2016, and that was the methodical protection of Hillary Clinton. And I see the dossier as a part of the Clinton campaign. I think all these things are wrapped together in a desperate effort to win the presidency and to protect her from herself. And luckily for the country's future, they failed, but we need to know more about them.
They say they care about collusion, outside influence, but they didn't care about the dirty dossier. They say they care about obstruction, but here we have Hillary Clinton, clear, overwhelming, incontrovertible evidence that she had top-secret classified information on a server, violation of 18 U.S.C. 793, the Espionage Act, and then, of course, the real obstruction, subpoenaed emails deleted, acid washing a hard drive with bleach spit, busting up devices with hammers, removing SIM cards. That would seem to be, the intention would be to literally eliminate all the evidence of the underlying crime. Nobody talks about that. The same people that scream, just like, they might care about allegations of sexual assault with a high school student named Kavanaugh, but not a Virginia lieutenant governor. I don't hear any of the I believers talking about the allegations of rape and violent sexual assault in his case.
Right. No, I mean, I think, hey, you're right. There is this whole problem of selective outrage, and if you're a conservative, you're going to get beaten up, and if you're a liberal, you're going to get protected. But beyond that, I think that the country deserves to know the facts. I think that there is an immense amount to be learned, and I think that if the Attorney General follows through, as I hope he will, I think in the next 4 or 5 months, we're just going to learn an immense amount that's going to repaint the story of 2016 in some ways that will really be startling for most Americans.
Got to take a quick break. We'll come back. Newt Gingrich is with us. All right, as we continue, Newt Gingrich is with us. His brand new book is out. Amazon.com, Hannity.com, bookstores anywhere. Ripped from the headlines called Collusion. All right, Mr. Speaker, we've got a call for you. I think this is fairly entertaining. You're going to want to hear this. Tom in California. Hey, Tom, you're on the Sean Hannity Show with Speaker Gingrich. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great, Sean.
What's going on?
I just had a quick nickname for Newt. I like your nicknames. Is America's Prime Minister. just because of his sense of history and just how patriotic he is. Kind of like America's Churchill.
Well, that's a very nice compliment, and I'll take it.
Well, let me add one thing. Newt Gingrich is an intellectual force of nature. He is a educator. He's a professor at heart. He is a historian, and he loves his country, and he knows and understands the things that matter most. And this is why, Mr. Speaker, this is so important. It's about the rule of law, equal justice under the law, equal application of our laws, and not allowing a few deep state arrogant bureaucrats to undermine an election because they think we're smelly Walmart voters that like Donald Trump.
Well, look, I think it is unbelievably important. I hope every listener understands that we were at a turning point in 2016, and we now know that if Hillary Clinton had won, that the corruption would have sunk deeper, that the bad guys would have gotten promoted and protected, and that we would rapidly have ceased to be the country that the Founding Fathers created. And I think what Mueller said yesterday was such a startling contradiction to the very essence of America, because the essence of America is not, he sounded, frankly, like he was in Russia or Venezuela or somewhere. In those kind of countries, the government decides whether you're innocent or guilty.
Yep.
And, you don't get to decide. The government decides. But in America, you're endowed by your creator
I'll tell you what,
with certain inalienable rights.
Do you have something to do, or you want to stick around, and maybe we'll take some calls in the next half hour?
I'll be glad to take some calls.
All right, quick break. We'll come back. Former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. All right, 25 now till the top of the hour. Toll-free telephone numbers, 800-941-SEAN, if you want to be a part of this extravaganza. What I've been saying, Mr. Speaker, is, when Lindsey Graham was questioning the Attorney General Barr about Mueller.
Do you share my concerns about the FISA warrant process?
Yes.
Do you share my concerns about the counterintelligence investigation, how it was opened and why it was opened?
Yes.
Do you share my concerns that the lack of professionalism in the Clinton email investigation is something we should all look at?
Yes.
Do you expect to change your mind about the bottom line conclusions of the Mueller report?
No.
Do you know Bob Mueller?
Yes.
Do you trust him?
Yes.
How long have you known him?
30 years, roughly.
Do you think he had the time he needed?
Yes.
You think he had the money he needed?
Yes.
Do you think he had the resources he needed?
Yes.
Do you think he did a thorough job?
Yes, and I think he feels he did a thorough job and had adequate evidence to make the calls.
Do you think the president's campaign in 2016 was thoroughly looked at in terms of whether or not they colluded with the Russians?
Yes.
And the answer is no, according to Bob Mueller.
That's right.
He couldn't decide about obstruction. You did. Is that correct?
That's right.
You feel good about your decision?
Absolutely.
Mr. Speaker, let me interpret the way I hear that. The Mueller issue is over, but this Attorney General, the things that I have and others have been discussing now and literally unpeeling the layers of the onions for 2 years are now front and center. And that would be, yes, in fact, Hillary Clinton's email investigation and the server, she did violate the law and she did obstruct justice. The evidence is incontrovertible. Yes, he's concerned about that. Yes, he's concerned about a dirty Russian dossier that Hillary paid for with funneled money through a law firm to a research firm to a foreign national that was, we now know, unverifiable because its own author says he has no idea if any of it is true. The FISA abuse by omission lying, not telling the FISA judges in the application that, in fact, Hillary paid for it. And then further, at the top of a FISA application, it says verified, but nobody verified anything. And they used it as an effort to spy on an opposition party candidate and spread disinformation. Now the Act 2 begins and the curtain rises on what is the biggest abuse of power scandal in history.
Well, look, what I was really struck with in that exchange, which I thought was really fascinating, and I thought that Lindsey Graham did a great job of setting that whole thing up. I really, for the first time, understood how deeply frustrated Trump must be, because imagine that Barr had gone in as his attorney general on day one. What a different world we'd be in. because Barr gets it. I mean, Barr understands that in the real world that we faced a really sick establishment doing some things that were really profoundly wrong, and that that needs to be fixed, and that he's going to fix it. And if we'd had that kind of an independent, hard-nosed Attorney General from day one, we would just be in a totally different place now.
What do you make, now that we know we have identified, and now the president, as of last week, has approved the declassification of the FISA applications, the 302 conversations, Gang of Eight information, exculpatory evidence that was withheld on purpose in specific cases. And then you look at, okay, well, they literally rigged an investigation for the favored candidate that Strzok himself said should win $100 million to zero because Trump is loathsome. And if he does win, don't worry, we have an insurance policy to take him out, which we now know is the Russian dossier. But they rigged an investigation. Then they lied to a FISA court, premeditated lies, because they were warned, all of them, in August of 2016 by Bruce Orr. They were warned 2 weeks before the first FISA application by a State Department person, Kathleen Kavalek, who met with Christopher Steele, who was in a panic because he had a deadline of Election Day, and others warned as well, but they did it anyway. That's premeditated fraud against the court. What would happen if I did that?
Well, I think right now you'd probably be in deep trouble, but if you'd been one of the chosen gang, you could have done all that and gotten away with it. I mean, that's the point I was making a minute ago. If Hillary had won, none of this would have come out. These guys were all protected. They were all counting on her winning. They were all confident that that was going to happen. And the result was that they were basically violating the core rules of the United States and doing things that can only be classed as corrupt. And I think that to suggest anything else, it makes no sense. But I'm also, as you know, I write novels such as Collusion, and I was a historian at one time. So I approach these things and I try to ask myself, what's the real big story? Well, the real big story here is pretty straightforward. The real big story is a group of people did some really bad things. That group of people happened to be at the very top of the United States government. It is certain that the Attorney General was part of it. It's very possible it went all the way into the Obama White House. And it's very possible that some of the things we're going to learn in the next few months are going to come right back and lead to the question of whether or not Joe Biden knew anything. But his defense, of course, is that he knew nothing, he learned nothing, and remembers nothing. So Biden might be able to skate. But I do think this thing, I don't see how this could have happened without people above this group knowing something serious was going on.
What does it mean if we don't get this right? Because what you're really describing is a situation where the favored candidate is not prosecuted because that candidate is the chosen one, and then the other candidate, you literally are using lies, disinformation, phony, uncorroborated, verified dossiers. They're spying on the Trump campaign in a multitude of ways. You got Stefan Halper, well, he's spying on Carter Page and Papadopoulos and Sam Clovis, and then we even have, ripped out of a novel, a blonde bombshell flirting with Papadopoulos to get information. Does he know anything about the Trump campaign colluding with Russia? And then the FBI, and especially Comey, says, well, we don't spy. Sounds like spying to me.
Well, look, I mean, what you have to start with, Comey, is understanding that you have no idea whether anything he says is true. I mean, the guy doesn't seem to have a compass of any kind, and has said all sorts of contradictory things, has done things that were clearly totally wrong. And I thought it was fascinating that Dershowitz, in his analysis of what Mueller did yesterday, said that as bad as Comey was when he went through that whole press conference about Hillary, that what Mueller did yesterday was even worse. So you got these guys who have some really bad habits. And who are really arrogant, and who, for some reason, think that they have the right to define innocence and guilt, when in our system, that's reserved to a judge and a jury, not to a prosecutor. All
right, let's go to our phones. Newt Gingrich has agreed to stay with us, take a couple of calls here. Alan is in the great state of Ohio. Alan, hi, how are you? And say hello to former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich.
Hello, Sean. Hello, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to speak with both of you.
Thank you.
Sean, in regard to Robert Mueller's news conference yesterday, it's very obvious he's a deep state operative. And I feel like we need to absolutely flood Senator Lindsey Graham's office with calls and emails to subpoena him to come up and answer to Congress for this travesty that he's perpetuated for 2 years.
I think he should. I want him to testify. I think Mueller's scared to death. I don't know what the noise is. Mr. Speaker, I think he's scared to death to answer questions from Jim Jordan about the team he picked, about the decisions he made, about ignoring the dirty Russian dossier, meanwhile getting, distracted on issues such as FARA and taxi medallions. I think he would have a very difficult task, and I suspect that Jerry Nadler and company will protect him.
Well, look, I think, when you come down to it, it's a situation where he would shrink every hour he was there as a witness, because once you start asking these questions, there are no good answers. Just the question, how could you have picked all left-wing Democrat lawyers and had nobody who was for Trump on your legal team? And the question you raised earlier, which I think is the most fascinating, which is, when did you reach the conclusion that there, in fact, had been no Russian collusion by the president? And why would you not have told that to the country in order to clear the President of the United States as he travels around the world from this thing hanging over his head?
Well, before his clarification yesterday, the 9.5 minutes he spoke, all he did was leave a cloud of suspicion, and then it took the cleaning up by the Attorney General, his office, together to say, no, we didn't mean what we said for 9 minutes. This is what we really meant. It had nothing to do with any Department of Justice policy that would prohibit the indictment of a sitting president. That was not the basis of the decision, which he had said multiple times before.
But that's the whole point. I don't, because if I understood it correctly, he actually read that statement.
He did. Well, I think he did. Which means that. Well, which
means he sat down somewhere, and he wrote out a statement that he didn't mean, which he read, and then had to come back. So he's now cleaning up the statement, which was designed to clean up the 448-page report.
Yep.
There's a point here where it becomes an absurdity, and that's why I think having him testify might be dangerous, because you have no idea where he's going to wander off to.
Oh, I think he will not have satisfactory answers to many of the questions we're raising. Like, you couldn't find one Republican. You really had to hire Hillary Clinton's attorney. You had to hire the guy that Sidney Powell writes about that withheld exculpatory evidence as your pit bull. The guy that was at Hillary Clinton's victory party. It's.
And frankly, I want to go back to the point I keep raising, which I'm just astonished has not had much deeper impact, and that is this whole question of putting people into solitary confinement when they have not been convicted of anything.
Wait a minute. We know what Judge Ellis said. We know this isn't about taxes. We know this is about putting the screws to Manafort in the hopes that he sings or composes for the purpose of getting to the president. That's what it was always about.
Right, but that strikes me, just when you say it, that has a chilling effect to me, because it suggests that we should somehow be comfortable. This is the opposite of the rule of law. The whole point is the end can't justify the means, not under the rule of law.
All right, quick break. More with former Speaker of the House. All right, as we continue, Newt Gingrich is with us. His brand new book is out, Amazon.com, Hannity.com, bookstores anywhere. Ripped from the headlines, called Collusion. Let me go to your wife's home state of Wisconsin. Attila has an important question. Attila, you're on with Newt Gingrich on the Sean Hannity Show.
Hello, gentlemen. How are you doing today?
Good, sir.
We're doing great.
Greetings from Kewanee. Yes. Thank you, Sean, for diligently presenting the facts. Thank you and your team. And Newt, you said you're a historian. I hope you're there to present the facts so liberals aren't rewriting history. But do you think, Sean, gentlemen, that this declassification order, do you think it's going to stand, or is President Trump going to be rescinding it again? I'm awful nervous.
Not even close. It's not a matter anymore. If the question is no longer if, it's when this information becomes available. It is not a question anymore. And remember, you do have the Inspector General investigation, you have the Durham investigation, the Uber investigation, and the Barr investigation. So it will all be brought together at a time, and I think it will collectively blow the minds of the American people about how deep this went in terms of corruption and abuse of power. Mr. Speaker.
No, I agree with that. I think that, first of all, the president's put himself in a pretty good position. He doesn't have to do anything. He has delegated to Attorney General Barr. He trusts Barr. I am confident that Barr is very methodically working this because that's the kind of lawyer he is. And Barr, as I think he proved now for the last couple of weeks, is fearless. So he's going to grind forward. Things are going to come out. Sean's exactly right. Things are going to come out which are going to stun people and shock people because really bad stuff was done. And I think that the country needs to learn what really did happen. And I think we now have an attorney general who has the courage to help the country learn that.
All right, Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich. By the way, his new book is called Collusion, ripped from today's headlines, and it is on Amazon.com, Hannity.com, bookstores anywhere. Mr. Speaker, we always love having you, especially these days you can stay longer. Thanks so much for being with us.
Talk to you soon.